think obviously then this is part of a process here where we're learning about DAFNI within the OpenClim consortium, and we have a vision of it, and that vision is, that understanding is becoming stronger, and to think through how we most effectively work with DAFNI really is obviously the kind of the key issue. I mean, I think that I suppose I'm reassured that I think what we proposed and what we said in the proposal is pretty much, seems pretty robust and what we need to be doing. I think one of the things that we probably need to think about more explicitly, it's been touched on, but we haven't got into the detail, is the development platform to get models ready for DAFNI, which is not, so I think we want to be loading models that are fairly, mature to go into DAFNI, and there's also the conceptualization of how we fit models together. So I mean, Fergus showed us one model, CityCat, being put on to DAFNI, but then there's the issue about linkage models together. There's the issue of adaptation, which we're putting quite a bit of effort into within OpenClim, and the fact that maybe we'll need to be writing either modifying some of these models, or writing small codes that work with them. I mean, at the end of the day, I suppose as long as you do either of those, they're fine. The choice will be something we have to think about downstream about how we accomplish that harmonization of these models, because again, they've been written separately for different purposes, and the people that wrote all these models didn't necessarily envisage them being linked quite in the way that we're proposing in OpenClim, which makes it very different from NISMOD, because NISMOD, the idea of linking those models was actually there when they were being written. So it's fundamentally different here, that we're taking disparate models and bringing them together to add value. So I think that's very much a task for Work Package 2, or Jeff, Luke and Brian to think about. I mean, and that's been discussed in steering group meetings. We have a steering group meeting this afternoon, and maybe we can touch on that sort of development function. And I think, we also talked about this, again, this tightrope. I mentioned it in my comments a moment ago about, once we've got the models into to DAFNI, and we've thought how they can be linked together, and we have data that underpins them, that's a huge scientific resource that allows an awful lot of work to be done, both within OpenClim and beyond. And I think the legacy I've stressed. But then we've also got to remember our customers. So really, so Catherine, Liz, and also Suraj as well, I think. I'm not sure what hat you're wearing here, Suraj, but I'll treat you as a customer today, and producing workflows out of that are useful for the CCRA4 and for other questions. And we were discussing, for example, flooding, with maybe, sort of the kind of parameters of climate, socioeconomics and adaptation being the sort of the key kind of parameters. I think we all realize that that's a pretty complex parameter set, and when you unpick each one of those, you get into a lot of complexity. But providing ways through some of what we're putting on OpenClim, some of what we're putting on DAFNI via OpenClim, but probably not all of it, in ways whereby our customers can use this before CCRA4 and then in CCRA4, and a capacity scientifically then to develop that further and develop other workflows over time that can answer more questions, and also clearly more sophisticated questions. When we were talking in our breakout group about looking at nature-based adaptation for flooding, which is something that's very high interest in, CCRA3 is doing it, we were talking about maybe initially looking at a stylized view of that approach, because Richard was pointing out the difficulty of really trying to find out what would happen on the ground and really getting down to the level of sort of projects. So again, sort of developmental aspect where we can demonstrate the capacity to look at it. We can look at it with kind of credible representations of adaptation, but then we can move on and think. It provides the impetus to actually capture what's happening, in data. So it encourages data development, and also other questions. I mean, I know that Rachel and Jeff would be very interested in the question with this flooding dimension. Where would you actually have synergies between nature-based flood adaptation and nature conservation? So you start to unpick, and back to who's our customers. Initially, I mean, I've said who our customers are, but as we start to answer those or pose those types of questions, maybe you have lots of other stakeholders coming into the room who are interested in the outputs that are coming from the project as well, because we can address sort of biodiversity priorities within the UK and climate change together. That's not. I don't think we're going to build that capacity, but whether we'll use it in OpenClim, I don't think we'll have the time to use that in OpenClim. But just kind of getting a sense of the journey that I think this is going on, and where this can go. So anyway, that's really all I want to say. I mean, clearly we'll need further sort of interactions. We haven't got a Pacific DAFNI event planned at the moment, and we'll discuss that at the steering committee today. But then we'll be having future events, more focused events, probably more focused around particular questions, like integrating the flood models into DAFNI, for example. So maybe sort of thematic meetings to really sort of progress this, because I think that probably makes more sense to people when they're talking about the model. This is conceptual, but talking about the model they're interested in. Do remember the NISMOD talk that, the ITRC talk that's been mentioned several times. I believe that's going to be recorded. So if you can't attend it, we will also publicize, presumably the YouTube version or whatever, the online version that comes out of it, so that people can watch that in their own time. So I think that will be instructive to OpenClim, in that it's a project that is fundamentally quite similar to OpenClim, and shows us how we can learn from it and move forward. I mean, are there any questions or comments from others that people would like to ask, raise?
I think my comment would be, maybe the next step is deciding which models are going to be linked together, and then the people who are going to be linking together should probably talk to each other and decide what that's going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's exactly. I mean, we have to design the. I mean, there's been discussions already, Fergus, on the flooding nature-based aspect has already been discussed. But yeah, we've got models to do with heat stress. We've got models to do with agriculture, biodiversity, etc. So it's it's bringing all those together. So yeah, but you're absolutely right, Fergus. We've got to kind of get practical.
Yeah, Robert, just on that, I know Brian has left, but Brian did set up a spreadsheet for all the models, input data about the models. Last time I checked that, there was still only a few models had filled it out. So I don't know whether it's worth recirculating that prior to any further discussions really about what models are going to be linked and how that process is going to happen. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Nag. That's good. Mentioned that in the steering committee meeting. So again, we'll ask Brian about that this afternoon. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, Robert. I think that what I'm picking up from the group I was in, that there's various levels of confidence and knowledge about Dockerizing models. So it might be worth running some kind of session with those people who would like it, on how you go about. I mean, we've got all the guidance notes up on DAFNI, so some way of helping people feel confident that they can go about doing that on DAFNI.
I would suggest that's probably yes, but we will probably want to have identified the individuals who need to know it. I would suggest, because so probably in a few months, when I think Fergus's comment is right about really understanding what we want to do within OpenClim. And then, so on a need-to-know basis, shall I say, Marion?
Yes. Sam has raised a question as well on the chat. Sam, do you want to come in, or?
Yeah, I'm around. My internet's kind of terrible, so it might be. No, I mean, that's just a question for anyone that may or may not know it.
So are there any plans to provide any distributed processing infrastructure inside DAFNI, things that should live outside of the model's Docker container, something like PySpark cluster?
I confess to not fully understanding the question. Sam, can you expand?
I guess I can come in here. I think I know what Sam's on about. This is like talking about sort of platform as a service stuff or infrastructure as a service stuff, probably. So being able to spin up, like it says, PySpark clusters, being able to spin up Postgres databases alongside your model. It's something, yeah, it's something we've thought about, and obviously it's something that a lot of models will require, and it's something we've done before in the pilots as well. So one of the pilots that Brian showed earlier about the train station, that spins up a Postgres. In Kubernetes, it's called a sidecar, so something that sits alongside your model run, and your model can make use of that over localhost connections. So that's probably what we'd be expecting you to develop against. So you'd expect a Postgres database to be there at localhost 5432 or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely something we thought about, not something that you can actually configure in the front end yet, but it's something that we probably is going to require to do for NISMOD. So it's something that we'll be adding in the before March 2021 kind of thing.
So it will be, the facility will be available if it's useful.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Right.
Robert, I just had a quick question and a comment. So the first, thanks very much for arranging this. It's been great to see under the bonnet of DAFNI. It's been really helpful. One is just when are you planning the sort of first national stakeholder? Because there's a few of the issues we touched upon today, I guess, need to be thrashed out at that workshop where, you know, some of the options that decision makers would like to see modeled or would be discussed. So it'd be good to get just a sense of when that's happening.
Before Christmas.
Okay. And then Tom mentioned something really interesting that I think under Mistral or ITRC, there's some development of visualizations where decision makers are kind of then going to be able to play around with it. And I think, Tom, you mentioned that it'll be ready for December, or you'll get to know more. So I just encourage maybe a bit of a follow-up either towards the end of the year or maybe early next year to sort of see how that looks like, to see whether that is a nice interface that decision makers could use based on whatever is learned in that project. Because I think visualization and user interface is going to be very important for the users of OpenClim through DAFNI. Yeah.
I've discussed this with Jim already. I mean, you know, and obviously, again, I suppose, again, his view, I mean, again, map output really, so you can actually look at the outputs in spatial terms. So yeah, no, definitely we want to learn as much and benefit as much from this mod as we possibly can, and the ITRC work. So I think one of the suggestions, and I think after the ITRC webinar, I was going to have a chat with Jim and see what he thought about maybe having a session for some of us with his team, just to talk about some of these issues in you know, sort of a working session to really a little bit like this, but maybe a sort of working webinar to really try and learn what we can from it. So yeah, I mean, that's an axis I will certainly be exploiting, Suraj.